Yeah, we know about the 10 horns. We read about them in chapter 13. These are 10 kings, kingdoms that will receive power under the Antichrist. Good evening and welcome to Sunday Night Bible Study with Pastor Josiah Shipley of Whitton Baptist Church. Good to be with you. We're going to be covering Revelation chapter 17 today, and we may get into Revelation chapter 18 because they're very similar. Remember, Revelation 17 and 18 are an in-depth look at what happened in specific judgments from chapter 16 and before. It doesn't progress as far as chronologically the story, because after the 7 bowls, the wrath of God is finished, and we have the return of Jesus. So again, we're going to cover chapter 17 and maybe 18 tonight. Kind of a overarching flashback look at what happened to certain key figures. I almost said characters, that's why I did that. Key figures in the book of Revelation during all this judgment, and then we'll move on with the return of Jesus. We're almost there. So, chapter 17. Let's read a little bit. So, this is right after the 7th bowl. If you don't know what that is, go back and watch last week's video. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come and I'll show you the judgment of the great prostitute." That's what this chapter is about. "Who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers of earth have become drunk. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple, scarlet, adorned with gold, jewels, pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of the abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. On her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of the earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, and I saw her and I marveled greatly." Okay, now what's great is, you read all that, you're like, huh? And then the next 8 verses are the angel explaining who that all is. So let me read that real quick and we'll go over it. "The angel said to me, 'Why are you marveling? I'll tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast and the 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast you saw was and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit.'" That's the Antichrist. We already read about him in chapter 13. "And go to destruction." Remember, Jesus has already won. "And which dwells on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen, one is, and another is yet to come. When he does, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and goes to destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power. They are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. These are of one mind. They hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer him, for he is Lord of lords, King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. The angel said to me," verse 15, "The waters you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The 10 horns you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate, naked, devour her flesh, and burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman you saw is the great city, has dominion over the kings of the earth." Okay. Now, let's go over those key figures again. Remember, the woman, the prostitute, is called Babylon the Great. The woman, the prostitute, and Babylon the Great are the same thing. But as long as you read that last verse, you know that the woman, Babylon the Great, has dominion over the kings of the earth. So some people, that's why they'll call Babylon the Great, instead of a city, they'll call it a world system. Which, I mean, it depends on how you look at it. It's a city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. So you could look at it as the world system. I'm fine either way. But specifically, Babylon is a great city, at least in my view. Look at verse 18. The great city. I take that pretty literally, as we'll see more in chapter 18. The beast is the Antichrist, not Satan, the Antichrist. The 7 heads are 7 mountains and 7 kings. We'll come back to that in a minute. We have already read about the 10 horns. We already know these are 10 kings and kingdoms who receive authority under the Antichrist. The waters are multitudes of peoples. And then we'll come back to the Lord of Lords. Okay. So, Babylon the Great, we're going to talk about the destruction of Babylon the Great a lot more detail in chapter 18, which we may glance over at in just a minute. We know about the Antichrist. Remember, when he comes to power, he has 10 kingdoms, nations, kings on his side until he becomes a worldwide power. When he becomes a worldwide power, he is the one, those 10, that destroy the great city Babylon the Great. Isn't that ironic? He's the one that does that. God uses them to do that. God has always used hardened hearts to carry out his will. About the 7 heads, they are 7 mountains and 7 kings. This is where it gets a little tricky. Because we know the New Testament often calls, us from Tennessee, especially East Tennessee, would call those mountains hills. We know what real mountains look like, right? And there's often a time where the Bible and the New Testament in that area will call something a mountain, and really it just looks like a big hill to us, but that's not the point. It's like, okay, well, we know that Rome was founded on 7 hills, right? At least that's what the stories tell us. And then there's some, okay, well, Jerusalem, if you count the Mount of Olives, and you count Zion, and you can get to 7, right? All that's fine. I think it's going to be tough to be dogmatic about that. I think that might be a little tough. One way we could look at this, especially where it says they are also 7 kings, verse 10. Let's look from John's perspective. He lives in the 1st century, right? 5 of these have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. This is just a possibility. Let's think of the 5 biggest world powers before John. Egypt? I'd say so. Assyria, and then remember who took over Assyria? Babylon. Then Persia, or we could say the Medo-Persia Empire. And after them, remember, was Greece. So there's 5 that have fallen. In John's day, who was the world power? Because he said 1 that is. Rome. The 7th being the Antichrist. And then it says, since there's an 8th that belongs to the 7, remember the Antichrist starts as a 10-kingdom system, and then after he's revealed, kills the 2 witnesses, destroys Babylon, he becomes a worldwide power. So he goes from being the one relatively local kingdom to a global kingdom. So he's the 7th and the 8th. That's how I read it. Could be wrong, and I am welcome to hear differing opinions there. It makes the most sense to me, especially for what we're about to read. Yeah, we know about the 10 horns. We read about them in chapter 13. These are 10 kings, kingdoms that will receive power under the Antichrist. Remember, the Antichrist is an actual human being. Jesus will kill him himself, according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, 3 through 11? 1, 3 through 11? 2, 3 through 11, I think. Go back to verse 14. The Antichrist and his 10 kings will make war on the Lamb. The Lamb will conquer them. Guess who's going to win? For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. Lord of lords and King of kings. Let's talk about that title just for a minute. These are some scripture verses for you to read for later. Deuteronomy 10:17. Daniel 2:47. 1 Timothy 6:15. I love that verse. The blessed and only sovereign, King of kings and Lord of lords. Psalm 136:3. Let's read those again. Deuteronomy 10:17, Daniel 2:47, 1 Timothy 6:15, and Psalm 136:3 all call Yahweh, God, the Lord of lords. Revelation 17:14 and 19:16 call Jesus the Lord of lords. Well, wrap your head around this. If Yahweh has the title Lord of Lords, and Jesus has the title Lord of Lords, the only way to reconcile that is that Jesus is God. Guys, remember, and if this goes over your head, I want you to rethink about it. God has eternally existed as one being, essence, nature, in 3 persons. Okay? Jesus, while he was on earth, was the exact opposite. He was two natures, being essences in one person. It's called the Hypostatic Union, okay? And there are all types of analogies we can try to use to explain that. And they're all going to fall short, right? We could try water, right? Water at room temperature, we just call water. It's in a liquid form. If we boil it 212 degrees Fahrenheit, we call that steam. If we freeze it to where it's below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, we call that ice. Ice, liquid water, steam, all instantly recognizable as H2O. Yet we call them different things and they serve different purposes, but all identical. That it's not perfect. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is this. Josiah the father, Josiah the husband, Josiah the pastor. I can distinguish between Josiah the husband, Josiah the father, Josiah the pastor, but I can't separate them because they're the same being, but three different persons, if you will. Again, human analogies will always fall short when we try to describe an eternal triune God. But that's what the Bible teaches. You won't be able to make heads or tails of the New Testament if you don't understand that Jesus is God. You won't be able to do it. You will go mad with all the Old Testament quotes that were originally attributed to Yahweh that the New Testament writers now attribute to Jesus. You will go mad. Now, let's talk about this last part, where the Antichrist and his 10 kings are the ones that kill Babylon the great city. We're going to talk about that great city in just a minute. Some of you may say, well, man, that's kind of harsh. You tell me God put it in their hearts to destroy that city? Yep. God has always used hardened hearts to carry out his good purpose. Remember, God has never been surprised at rebellion, and he will always use rebellion to accomplish his plan. God using their rebellion was always part of plan A. There is no plan B. God's hand has never been thwarted. Remember in Daniel 4 what Nebuchadnezzar said after God brought him back to his sanity. All the inhabitants of the earth are counted as nothing. The Lord does with whatever he wants with the host of heaven and those on earth. Maybe confusing psalm. And then he says this. No one can stay his hand, can stop him, or say to him, what have you done? No one. Romans 9:17, God says to Pharaoh, I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I may display my power. Remember that first power, Egypt? God used the rebellion to do what he wanted. The next world power, Assyria, Isaiah 10. Israel, if you don't get right, I'm sending Assyria. They are the rod of my wrath. Assyria, not being forced by God, but doing whatever they wanted, went and tried to destroy Israel, and then God punished them for it because they did what was evil. And if you think Assyria gets away with it, God says, nope, I'm raising up Babylon, Jeremiah 20, verse 4. And I'm going to hand over Judah to the king of Babylon, and he will deport you. If you think Nebuchadnezzar gets away with it, nope. Isaiah 44:28 and 45:1, God declares that I will be sending Cyrus from the Medo-Persian Empire to destroy Babylon and to return the Jews back to their land, to Jerusalem, even after Nebuchadnezzar deports them. What's amazing about Isaiah 44:28 and 45:1 is that was written before Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Jerusalem. Meaning that is God predicting the Medo-Persian Empire under Cyrus will allow the return of the Jews before Nebuchadnezzar has laid siege to Jerusalem. That's power. That's sovereignty. If you think the Medo-Persians get away with their evil, nope. Daniel chapter 8, Alexander the Great is prophesied as the goat with a horn that destroys the ram with the two horns. Its feet barely touch the ground. It's moving so fast from west to east. And then Daniel 8 describes his empire being splitting up into 4 kingdoms. Remember, Alexander the Great's empire was split up and to his 4 generals. When Alexander does that, the entire known world now speaks Greek. And if you think Alexander the Great gets away with his conquest, nope. God sends the Romans. Acts 4, 25 through 28. Why do the nations rage, and the Gentiles plot against God's anointed? For in this very city, both Herod, Pilate, the Jews, and the Gentiles came together against your Messiah to do whatever your hand and your plan have predestined to take place. God has always used hardened hearts to carry out his purpose. The Antichrist is no different. God, when we say he's at war with Satan and the Antichrist, he's not really at war. He's conquering. I mean, that's what it says, right? Verse 14, the Lamb will conquer them. Remember, Armageddon is not really a battle. It's an execution. Jesus wins. Babylon appears to be, in verse 18, a literal city with worldwide influence. Now, it's possible the Antichrist will start there. That's what it makes it sound like, because, the Babylon is sitting on top of the beast. But he won't stay there. After he's revealed and travels to Jerusalem to kill the 2 witnesses, I believe he'll set up shop somewhere else. Because no longer will he just be ruling 10 nations, but he'll be worldwide. Babylon, that city, will have worldwide economic influence before the Antichrist comes to power. We're going to read in more detail about Babylon the Great next week. I thought we might get to chapter 18 a little bit today, but we're not going to. And we'll try to make some guesses at what city is Babylon the Great. But we're not going to go crazy with it because we don't know for sure. So, next week, we'll do chapter 18. There was chapter 17. We zoomed through that one. There's chapter 17 of Revelation. As always, I hope these videos are helpful to you guys. I sure do like doing them. We're almost there through Revelation. Tune in next week for chapter 18 online. And I went ahead and did this online, and I pre-recorded it because next Sunday night, we won't have an in-person Bible study because we have the block party. The one that commercial keeps popping up for in these videos. If you're somewhere in the area, you should come to that. We're going to start at, I believe it's 4 p.m. You have fun, guys. I love you all very much. God bless.